Thank you. So we'll move on. I was going to give a brief overview of the program because it has changed a little bit over this last year. So the change that happened about a year ago was that the administration of the program moved from the Economic Development Department over to the county administrator. And we serve as a hub to coordinate the program across all of these many departments and state agencies, and everyone has a unique role in administering the cannabis ordinance. So we're here today to talk about updating the cultivation section of our ordinance to its own chapter and really aligning with state regulations where possible, implementing lessons that we've learned over these last I guess it's been 3.5 years, and streamline the permitting process, also clarifying standards for everyone who's involved. The key areas of study, we were directed in December of 2019 from our Board of Supervisors to look at how we can make the program more ministerial while focusing in the agriculture-related zones. So that's what we're doing, and we're embarking on an environmental impact study with a consultant, and we're looking at these 4 zones: land-intensive agriculture, land-extensive agriculture, diverse agriculture and resources, and rural development zoning districts, exclusive of the coastal zone. One of the most important things, as mentioned, was moving away from discretionary where possible and assessing those ministerial standards and updating the ordinance appropriately. It's worthy to note that most of the environmental standards are staying the same, and some of those differences we'll be covering in the upcoming slides. Most drastically, we're looking at expanding the outdoor cannabis cultivation area allowed per parcel from 1 acre to 10% of the parcel for parcels in those 4 zones above 10 acres, keeping that 10-acre minimum. Also, we're looking at removing the per person acreage cap for cultivation. Currently, that's at 1 acre per person or operator. We're looking at adding a tier for mixed light. This aligns with the state, and what it does is it gives us another tier for taxation, and it also could encourage what we're looking at is light deprivation, and currently that's mixed light. We would be splitting that into a new tier within mixed light, and those tiers are 0 to 6 watts of supplemental light per square foot is the first tier. And then things that are 6 watts to 25 watts is the second tier. And that's within a hoop house or greenhouse cultivation. We're exploring screening requirements for fencing if the cultivation is not visible from the public right-of-way. We're really going to be exploring aesthetics and the screening concepts, especially as it relates to the current hemp ordinance and how hemp is being treated, and the fencing and screening requirements really do kind of point out that a grow is there. So maybe it didn't accomplish what we were really trying to accomplish the first time, so we're going to explore that. Also, we are going to look at requiring net zero for projects that are in critical watersheds.
Can you just repeat what you said one more time? I want to be sure about the mixing or splitting out the mixed light category into 2 tiers.
Sure. So the first tier would be light deprivation techniques, which is, no electricity. It's just parts that they pull. And that would be, they may use some supplemental light, 0 to 6 watts. And then the second tier is anything above 6 to 25 watts of supplemental lighting. And they can combine techniques in that second tier of light depth and light. And if Andrew would like to add anything more to that, please feel free. Okay, I'm gonna move on.
I would just add,
go ahead.
sorry, I had trouble getting my thing off mute. I would just add that this is how the state has defined mixed light, and it's also in line with how our current ordinance defines mixed light as light deprivation activities plus some supplemental lighting from 0 to 25 watts per square foot. And the state breaks it into 2 tiers, 0 to 6 watts per square foot, which is very minimal, and then greater than 6 to 25 watts square foot of supplemental lighting. So,
and I have a question. This is if we're done with that one. This is Commissioner Davis. I have a question. If this is a good time to ask.
Sure.
Can you say a little bit more about net zero in critical watersheds? What specifically are you talking about?
So we're talking about projects that do happen to fall within those critical watersheds. I had met with some folks from the Mark West Watershed Group last fall, and we've been really studying our water standards with Robert Pennington as in-house subject matter expert, and looking at ways that we can allow the existing projects for sure that have already been approved, and most of them are, and maybe I would have to check, I shouldn't say most of them, but all of the ones that I've interacted with are achieving net zero in those critical watersheds, and so just making it the standard and, you know, enhancing the environmental standards in this way.
Okay, so you're talking net zero water use.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Another change that we're looking at, and currently we're in the process of consulting with the tribes about this. So, you know, we'll see where this lands, but right now what we're proposing is revising the cultural resources standard to require a survey for each application, to just go ahead and, you know, do that. And then as it's not required to confer referrals under AB 52, we would be removing that requirement, but in its place, we would be requiring a resource survey for each project. So we'll see where the conversations around this goes, and that's where we're at this moment. We're looking at revising limitations on indoor and greenhouse cultivation and limiting the accessory structures to a percentage of lot building coverage. And that those standards exist for ag already and land development already. So we would just be aligning with what we currently do in other uses. And then looking at revising the setback and fencing requirements for greenhouses, again, aligning to how we do other uses, and removing square foot limitations on mixed light and indoor cultivation that are utilizing existing structures. We're also considering revising the measurement technique for sensitive use setbacks to be from the parcel line of the sensitive use to the land use activity as shown on the approved project site plan. Additionally, allowing propagation that's incidental to the cultivation. We would be removing operator qualifications because that is covered at the state level, and it's a bit duplicative for us to have that same requirement. We're also trying to streamline, so this would be a streamlining measure. And then removing cannabis-specific restrictions on tours and promotional events. We already have standards for those, and so these would be covered under those existing standards. And this is not, this would be not tied to the winery events that's going later. So just aligning to the existing, and we're studying those impacts. And with that, I'd like to take a moment to pause and see if there are any questions about the areas of study that we're looking at. If not, I'll move into the timeline.
I see. Commissioner
You had a
Morrison?
question?
Yes?
So the events for cannabis, would that still go on? I believe the county was working on kind of a county-wide event schedule. Would those be incorporated with that, or are you talking about things that would be just more customary to within the use permit and not special events?
Special events, I believe you're talking about ones that would require a use permit, the same as they already would require a use permit. We're just allowing cannabis now to participate in that existing program. So for anything that requires a use permit for the size and the number of events, they would need to go through that process, which I believe they have to go through planning and get sign off from health, the sheriff, and many other folks. We would also be looking at sort of enhancing as an agricultural activity, and we are going to be studying cannabis as agriculture as well. So looking at how we can have farm tours at some point and what that would look like for the industry. I think there's a lot of innovation out there, and it's a complementary agriculture activity. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here with that.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Shakar?
Yeah, thanks. So the biggest, at least in my view, the biggest problem that we've had with those permits that come through the hearing process is the question of odor, and a significant portion of our community out there that thinks the setbacks are too small. And I think those folks have been told now for a couple of rounds of ordinance updates that there was going to be an update which addressed those issues directly. Is that, I don't see that in your list. Is that not part of this next round?
The consideration of odor is something we continuously discuss at the staff level. That is for sure. There is always consideration about odor. We have been discussing this with our consultants, and, you know, given the baseline, we will be looking at those impacts. It is something we are looking at. So, but there is technology, it's pretty subjective, and that's, I think there's a lot left to learn.
And what about the issue of setbacks? Quite a few folks out there think our setbacks are way too small. I see we're opening it up for, I think, greenhouses and indoor, which I think is a good move. I know it's not time to debate. But for outdoor cultivation, I think there's people out there expecting to at least be able to address those setbacks, whether or not you know, you guys propose it or not. Is that going to be part of this ordinance?
So what we're doing is looking at the technique and the way that we measure the setbacks to hopefully address some of those concerns. And also the idea behind allowing for more than an acre on an appropriately zoned parcel would be that those grows that are abutting or sort of like in areas that are concerning migrate because of the changes that we're making, so that it is less impact on neighbors. So we're trying to align the cultivation standards with the parcel zone in zones that make more sense. Does that make sense, Commissioner Carr?
Well, I just think it's important to, in the rhetoric and in the background and in the presentations that you come forward with, that you specifically talk about setbacks and odor. Whether or not you are able to, you know, change anything or propose any changes in the standards, I think it's important that those folks who are expecting something out of this round feel like they've at least gotten consideration, if not recommendation. So that's my point. And I think looking at that in a fair manner would be a good way to maybe help promote cannabis as a future agricultural crop and enjoying all of the same benefits that other agricultural crops enjoy.
Yeah, and following on to that comment on the odor, you're using a consultant. Who's your consultant?
Currently, we are working with Rincon, and they're assisting us with studying our existing negative declaration, looking at the changes that we're studying and what those impacts may be. So that's what we're doing currently, and we may need to expand that based upon, you know, these various check-ins that we're currently doing. So we're trying to get ahead of it in the timeline and check in with people now so that we can make a very robust study. So thank you for these comments. It's very helpful. And I would like to ask if Sita or Andrew wanted to add anything about those two topics. We do discuss them at length. Odor and setbacks.
Yeah, this is Andrew. Just want to, reiterate that we do discuss odor and setbacks in really every meeting. And while it was not specifically included as a bulleted item in any one of these slides, it has been discussed at length, not just amongst staff, but also with our consultant as we work on a subsequent mitigated negative declaration environmental document. And we've also been working on outreach with the regional water quality control, or excuse me, air quality, Bay Area air quality, so that we can evaluate the impacts of cultivation that's expanded potentially on ag and resource zone properties. So.
Commissioner Davis, I have a question.
Go ahead, Pam.
So just to kind of piggyback on what Commissioner Carr said, and to add a little bit here, I think that one of the things that we've encountered is on some of the more neighborhood-oriented parcels, there was, it's more of a concentration, not of grows, but a concentration of homes, and those were the places where it seemed like there was just more of a concern, even if it. I know we aren't doing anything in RR, but I'm thinking DA, and there was another zone where you're more likely to have more of a residential feel to a neighborhood. And that was where I think we really had some pretty strong sentiments about setbacks. And I agree with Commissioner Carr that there's definitely some neighborhood groups that are feeling pretty concerned about, especially again in those more dense residential zones, even if they're zoned appropriately. So that's just a comment. I have one other question. In terms of removing limitations for indoor grows on existing structures, what is to stop someone from getting a use permit for a barn or some other ag unit, and 3 years later, 5 years later, it's an existing structure, and how is that going to be managed?
So I believe, we did discuss that, and we can't read people's minds. So if they come in and they get a building permit and they build a building, and then they come in 3 years later and they want to get a permit for growing cannabis, they would be subject to all the same standards and have to jump through all the same hoops. So I guess it would go.
I can jump in also. I mean,
yeah, Scott, please.
It's not a unique problem to cannabis. I mean, someone could take an undeveloped parcel, build a single-family residence, and then propose another use for that site that's now disturbed by the ministerial process. So there's always going to be the potential for shifts in what a property owner wants to do. So someone could technically come in for a use permit, go through the public hearing process, have very specific conditions that it not be for cannabis, and then at a later date decide, well, I want to do that, and they would have to start a new application with the new rules at the time. There wouldn't be any going back. It would all be, fresh. So that is something that, we struggle with on any land use entitlement.
Thank you.
And I follow up on that too. This is John Lowry. Yeah, I'm very concerned about the setback in areas where there is a fair amount of housing, and I think that one of the tools or the options that we won't take, and I don't quite understand why we won't take it, is the possibility of indoor growth on agricultural land. It seems that it's driven by a sense of aesthetics about not wanting to see any more building on agricultural land, although the cannabis is restricted in terms of the percentage of land that can be used for cultivation on any particular lot. We had a project proposal that actually was approved a little over a year ago, where the setback was between 300 and 400 feet from the grow to homes, and of course those people were very distressed. I mean, they were angry and they were agitated and they were scared when they came in and talked to us. And the irony was that the proponent of the project was perfectly ready to put it indoors, but they couldn't. Because the rule was that you could only have a certain amount of indoor grow. I really think that if we're not willing to extend setbacks and even remove certain types of land from being able to cultivate cannabis, that we need to have this other option for cannabis to be grown in proximity to housing. We need to look at that. We need to discuss it.
Certainly, we're looking at opening up the indoor and the greenhouse cultivation by aligning to existing buildings lot coverage percentages. So I believe it's up to, is it 40 acres, Scott? Is an acre under this new standard that we're looking at, and then anything over 40 acres is 50% of the existing building lot coverage. And I turn it over to Scott because he's more of an expert there.
To take a step back, every zoning district has certain building lot coverage limits. So one thing that Nikki and her team are exploring in terms of this update is, taking the existing allowance for cannabis right now, which caps out at an acre, and looking at ways that that and the lot coverage can be considered at the same time. Understanding that, on a very large parcel, you could be allowed technically a very large structure. Many zones allow a structure, up to 85,000 square feet. And so as part of this update, thinking about that, they need to analyze that, especially from an aesthetic input component. Mm-hmm. Also, there's factors such as removing soil, productive agricultural soil that may be designated as statewide important, local importance, things like that, which are protected in things like the general plan or other important local planning documents. So it is something they're looking at, but it needs to be assessed from the environmental component first.
Well, I think that if we can't do it, I think we need to rethink the whole issue of how much you can grow in neighborhoods, essentially. And I think every time I hear staff talk about it, it's like, oh, you can't get there from here, but anybody, we can get there from here if we want to do it, if we take it seriously. And I think we simply need to take this seriously. And those of us on the BZA and Planning Commission need to be willing to turn down projects if they are in too close a proximity to housing, or particularly any amount of housing. I don't think we need that confrontation if we're really willing to just look at what their options are and extend our options to the greatest possible extent in order to avoid the odor, which you can control if you can put it indoors, or even somewhat indoors. We need to look at that more seriously.
If I may say something, Commissioner Lowry, this is Andrew Smith from the Ag Commissioner's Office, and I just want to raise the thought in this conversation that we've chosen to look at industrial hemp in a very different light. And it's due to primarily to its federal legalization as an agricultural commodity, as well as at the state level. We know that at the state level, cannabis is a legal agricultural product. We believe it is agriculture. I think that when you look at the botany of the two plants, that there is a very minor difference, and that is in its cannabinoid constituents. And, anybody could go and plant, 200, 300, 500 acres of hemp in Sonoma County right now in ag zoned zoning designations. And the odor would be the same. And so why are we choosing to be so restrictive when it comes to odor with something that is botanically equal in form and in function? And I think I wanted just to bring that up so that the planning agency has an opportunity to think about how we look at the same plant in a different light when considering setbacks, when considering odor, and really all aspects of cultivation in general. Thank you.
So, I think you've heard already why people care about the odor. I understand what you're saying about the hemp. I am curious about the legal interpretation on that. Are you saying that they're able to just put in hemp regardless of odor because of right to farm, or what's that?
Hemp as a legal federally recognized and state recognized agricultural commodity is equal to corn in most respects. And while we have made specific required setbacks in the hemp ordinance that are waivable in writing, the other setbacks that we have for hemp in agriculturally zoned areas of the county are in the best management practices. And so if a farmer, instead of planting 200 acres, or a dairyman wanted to plant, instead of planting 200 acres of corn, feed corn, they could just as easily choose to plant 200 acres of hemp. And, it wouldn't be an issue. It might be an issue for odor for some of the neighbors, but we would be afforded the defense of the right to farm ordinance if they were following all of the ordinance standards and the best management practices in their operation.
I would be interested in a legal interpretation. I don't know if council's looked into it, but when I read the Right to Farm Act stuff, it had to do with protecting existing farmland from people saying it's a nuisance who move in closer and things like this. That's a little different from if you're the resident who's there first and somebody puts in a new odorous crop.
That's not true. You're wrong.
Yeah, I understand the issue of hemp, and I think there's another conversation there to see what the options are. But I'm not talking about areas where somebody could plant 100 acres of anything. I'm talking about 10-acre parcels that are 10, 20-acre parcels that are right next to where houses, where people are living, where there are a number of homes. It would be a question of what, and I think that it's more likely that we're going to see cannabis, marijuana type cannabis, in those places, because that we are looking at that as much smaller operations. Nobody's allowed to plant 200 acres of cannabis. So, but I think where we're going to see these places, a lot, the areas or the parcels on which people want to grow some form of cannabis crop is going to tend to be what we're now calling cannabis. We used to call marijuana, and I think that it still makes sense for us to be looking at it in those situations. I realize that this might not apply to very large parcels or that are available for growing hemp as well, but it's really the neighborhood context that would drive this ability to have we need to see more flexibility on the ability of growers to put it inside in those situations.
I think it might also be helpful if Nikki finished her presentation, just for the...
There's only a couple slides left, really. So just wanted to go over the timeline. We are here today at the planning agency updating you about what we're studying and what we're thinking about. We do have a memo we're expecting from council related to cannabis as agriculture, and that gets to Commissioner Tamura's question about the right farm. So in some ways, hopefully we get those answers sooner than later. And then we'll be reviewing that subsequent mitigated negative declaration, draft ordinance, and we're going to have our staff meetings over the August timeframe. At the same time, it's not on this timeline, but I will be meeting with various groups, and we are doing tribal consultation. Then we're coming back to Planning Commission after we finalize those documents and circulate them, targeted for the 7th of September. We would want to come to the Planning Commission in October, on October 15th. So from today through October 15th, that's the staff work plan and where we're going to be doing various outreach. And with our communications plan, like you had mentioned at the last presentation, I believe that COVID-19 constraints actually provide us an opportunity to gather more input from the community. So we will be doing Zoom meetings. We will be recording those meetings and posting them on our cannabis website. And then we are, obviously as people email us, we put anything related to the ordinance. Those comments will be in the public record. And how to connect with us, there's the Cannabis Program website, or you can email the Cannabis inbox, and the department analyst that works with me in the county administrator's office, McCall Miller, she helps manage those inquiries. And you can also snail mail to the Cannabis Program at Administration Drive. And if you're wanting to set up time where our team can come and talk with you, or you want to set up a time to talk more about what we're planning, you can certainly reach out through the email or snail mail, and we can set up an appointment for that. And with that, happy to answer any additional.
I do have one other question. This is Commissioner Davis.
Yes.
Nikki, at the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned they were doing an environmental impact study, but is it in fact a mitigated negative deck that's in process?
So at this point, based on all of the requirements and all of the variables that we gave them, that's where the draft is landing. And we aren't, finished yet. So we're still looking and working through that process with them, and we would be coming back to the Planning Commission in October. So we're kind of trying to give ourselves time to do these check-ins and get more feedback to incorporate into those conversations.
Okay, but at this point, so does that mean that you're not sure what environmental document is going to be the final product at this point?
Well, certainly it wouldn't be anything more than a subsequent mitigated negative deck, because we kind of gave them the worst case scenario, if you will, or the most expanded case scenario. So they came back with that, and from there we can start to incorporate mitigations into standards or look at other aspects. But at this point, I don't see it being more than that.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yes.
So I have a question regarding the odor. I mean, I hear, you talk about it a lot and this sort of thing, but I mean, what actual analyses have been done? What has been learned from all the hundreds of odor complaints that have come in the past with regard to setbacks? Have you looked at what Colorado has done with respect to their setbacks, et cetera?
As far as, go ahead, whoever that was.
This is Commissioner Tamura.
I'm just going to jump in for a second. So I believe they're still fairly, they're in the early stages of working on the environmental review, and odor would primarily be a component of the environmental review rather than maybe a line in an ordinance. So it's more of the relationship of odor to the guidelines, standards, changes, rather than coming at it, starting at odor. Odor is really a result of everything else. So I believe that that's how they're going to be looking at it, knowing that it is a significant issue, but it's, how does the things that's required in our code lead us to that point? And what can we do to mitigate that? So
yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not sure really which one's the chicken and the egg, in the sense that, the setback distances were initially identified to us as being, what was being used for odor mitigation. So, if you don't know what the odor is, then how do you know what the right setback distance is and so forth? But going to Commissioner Lowry's comment, I think that what's going to happen is it's not an exact science. And if you make some evaluation and it ends up being wrong, and somebody downwind does have some significant odor impacts, for an outdoor grow, what other mitigation options, significant mitigation options do you have aside from enclosing? And is enclosing even an option given what he was talking about?
We discussed things, sorry, Scott, I'll jump in. We discussed things such as vegetation as a possibility to assist with some of that mitigation. We're looking, as Andrew had mentioned, he's working with the Bay Area Air Quality Board, and we're looking at various studies as they become available. I know we also participate in a couple of consortiums with other counties and what they're doing, so I keep close tabs on benchmarking with them. And Yolo is one of the counties that has implemented something in their ordinance related to odor. And so we all are closely kind of monitoring how that's going with Yolo, so that so we can learn from them, because it is so subjective and it's ever changing as the cannabis industry gets more innovative. Maybe there are other things that we can look at as technologies progress and things change. But at this moment, we've discussed vegetation barriers. We did discuss the moving of cultivation indoor and how opening that up for the cultivators may impact that. And also just the natural migration of grows, because we're opening up the number of acres in appropriate parcels, and also the number of operators. So hopefully these changes combined help balance what the neighbors are concerned about, as well as what the industry is concerned about, because I'm looking for that sweet spot, as maybe you all are, of balancing the concerns with the innovation in the industry.
Could I jump in for a
Chair, I just want to take a little bit of a broader view to clarify what's happening here versus maybe individual projects that may come. So this is an ordinance update that staff is preparing. There will be an environmental review of that document. planned now as a subsequent mitigated negative declaration. That ordinance will propose some projects that will be approved on a ministerial permit basis and others through a more use permit discretionary process. Those discretionary permits then later would come through you, and each of them would have be subject to CEQA unless an exclusion or exemption applied. So there may be subsequent environmental documents on individual projects, and you would have an opportunity to look at individual impacts and mitigate them. And so I just want to differentiate the ordinance and the environmental review on the ordinance and drafting policies that ultimately make their way to you and the board from later individual discretionary projects that may come forward. So I just wanted to just tease that out so that we're clear what we're talking about today, which is proposed ordinance and environmental review on that ordinance.
Yes, I understood that, but I also heard Nikki say earlier that they were moving towards fewer things being use permit and more things being ministerial, in which case they would be exempt from CEQA.
Correct.
And I think the ag commissioner's point is if you can plant hemp and hemp smells similar to cannabis, what's to stop somebody from planting both and saying, well, how can you tell which, where the odor's coming from? Because hemp is a federally recognized crop under the right to farm policy. And so again, it's like you can't have dairy cows because they smell, but you can have beef cattle because they don't. A cow's a cow, just like hemp and cannabis are, they kind of do the same thing and they make the same smell.
This is Commissioner Davis, if I can jump in for a second here. So coming out of an industry that was very odoriferous, compost, I think that the setbacks, well, let me just back up. And I know everybody would like to move on from this odor issue. I think my concern is more in terms of the concentration of homes. We are not going to be able to.
Commissioner Davis?
Lost you. I lost her.
Allowing the cannabis on the smaller parcels, because it's not only odors that neighbors are concerned with. I mean, I think, odor is going to be something that's just, something we're going to have to deal with. But I think that the concentration of neighbors are not only concerned about odor. And, if we look back at all the different hearings we've had, that's not their only concern. And I just feel like keeping it out of our neighborhoods is important. And I totally agree. If you've got a 200-acre hemp farm, a 200-acre cannabis farm, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. And I completely concur with that. You're not going to have them on the same parcel because there's not allowed to be crossover between those products, which is a whole other question. I have no idea how farmers are going to manage that, but that's for another day.
I could answer that question if you'd like an answer for that question.
Only if it's brief, because it's really kind of a little bit off topic, but yes, sure.
Yeah, I would just say that cannabis can exist on the same parcel where hemp exists and vice versa. The definition in the state's laws is that you cannot issue or approve a hemp registration on a cannabis licensed premises. And what that means for a cannabis licensed premises is they need to very carefully define the discrete footprint of their cannabis activity that's subject to licensing by the state of California. That leaves all the other portions of the parcel eligible for registration for hemp cultivation. And so you can have both taking place on the same parcel.
So Andrew, isn't it true that in the hemp has to be, forgive me, I'm going to totally mess this up, but that it has to be tested and isn't allowed to have over a certain percentage of THC, and and isn't that directly related to that cross contamination?
That is correct, that it does get sampled and tested before harvest, and that we have the authority to ordered destruction of a crop that does not meet the 0.3% THC threshold. The cross-contamination would come when plant genetics are allowed to mix, and we have a rule in our ordinance that prescribes that only female propagative material can be planted subject to a hemp registration. So there shouldn't be any cross-pollination, and all rearing of any male propagative material in hemp must be done indoors or mixed light structures with intake and output odor filtration and in essence pollen filtration.
That's right. I knew there was a magic formula there somewhere. Thank you, Andrew.
You're welcome.
Can I just ask one follow-up question to that? Commissioner Kelly here. Thank you, Andrew, for that explanation, and that's really helpful to get a better understanding of getting, bad pun, but getting really into the weeds here with some of these issues. My question is historically, have we had any concerns? Has there been issues raised with cross-contamination with hemp? Is there a history of a problem? Are we kind of raising something that hasn't been a problem? I'm just trying to get an understanding of if these rules were established to prevent something that we've seen happening historically that was problematic, or if it's just part of the ordinance. And then also, as it relates to odor and the hemp production, if that's also been an issue or what we've seen.
Yeah. It is a problem in other states that have legal and established cannabis and hemp industries. Cross-pollination is an issue where people are unable to maintain control over the male propagative material in the field. That is why we made the effort in the hemp ordinance to create compatibility with these two nascent industries in our county. To protect each of them from the negative impacts of each other's activities.
Do we have any applications or any plans for hemp propagation in Sonoma County? Is there anything currently moving along? Somebody actually wants to do this?
We have currently approved 10 hemp registrations that equate to approximately 20 acres of hemp in the county of Sonoma, and they range in size from 1/10 of an acre to 3 acres and to 5 acres. The individuals that have been approved for hemp cultivation in the county at this point in time do have the capacity to expand what is now about 20 acres to what could be, 500 acres in 1, 2, 3, or 4 years, depending on how the market forms around the commoditization of that crop in California.
Yeah, well, my sense is that as it will be a commodity, and as you know, commodities are produced at very small margins of profitability because they're very competitive. That California will not, in the end, be the place that people are really going to want to grow hemp in large amounts because we have the dry summer and we have to irrigate it. We also have some more expensive infrastructure and inputs than other parts of the country. And I wouldn't be surprised if this we have a lot of farmland unused in the Southeast and the Midwest. At those places, particularly that have summer rainfall, are ultimately going to be cheaper and more appropriate for large-scale hemp production. That's not to say we're not going to have any, and we're not going to have this issue, but I think imagining us being overrun with hemp for any particular period of time, when the competition from other areas is clear, is probably not going to be the case. I could be wrong, but I don't think we should assume that we're going to see that as a major crop in Sonoma County for an ongoing period of time.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Morrison had his hand raised a while ago before me. I don't know if he...
Yeah, I think he said something, but do you have something else, Commissioner Morrison? Okay.
I just have a suggestion. We're in the middle of summer. I'm assuming that some of the permits that we've approved for marijuana are growing. And I didn't, John answered, or Andrew answered my question about whether there was any hemp currently growing, but I would suggest a few staff visits to some of the grows, assuming that some of them are happening, particularly Pepper Lane, where the odor thing was a huge issue there. There's a couple of nearby houses. And, you know, the one in Roanoke Park, I just think that somebody going out and just, you know, maybe on a semi-windy day and get a sense of what the odor issue is. I would love to see us be able to legitimately set it aside as an issue. But at this point, the commission is being bounced back and forth like a tennis ball in these hearings where, you know, one side says it doesn't smell at all, the other side says it smells to high hell, and then somebody gets up and says hemp is going to be worse. So I'm just looking at some point in this ordinance for some rational thinking to go into the odor issue. I recognize that it's not nice black and white hard line type of decision. It's because there's going to be a lot of judgment, but to have some on the ground input and results from what's happened over the last couple of years would be very helpful, at least to me. I hope you do that.
Commissioner Carr,
Yes.
if I may. Last fall, when I took this position, I instituted a round of what I harvest smell tours. And we went around with several staff and you know, board member staff, and we did these smell tours. And so I can provide a lot of anecdotal evidence about the smell in various topography or weather conditions that I've experienced, but I think what you all are looking for is something more scientific, more data driven. And in my experience, I wasn't getting those smells until maybe about 25 feet away from the cultivation sites. So, and some of them not at all until you got right up in there. So it's very interesting, and we do annual inspections with our penalty relief participants. And starting in the next few weeks, I'm going to be going out with Andrew's staff, and we're going to conduct tours for canopy verification and for, you know, what's on my work plan, which is getting out to visit every single penalty relief project and doing an assessment of their status. And this is something that I certainly always test. So whenever I go to a project, I do my sniff test to see how far is it from here that I can smell. But that's just one person. And so that's the other subjective part, right? Is that any of the measurement tools that they have now are based on an individual's sense of smell. And so what I think smells nasty, you may not, or you may smell it further away than myself. So that's the hard part with the subjectivity on odor. We will continue to chip away at this, though. We will.
Thank you for that.
Through the chair, I just since I'm noticing a lot of people stretching, so I just want to mention that this is primarily an update of where things are in the process. And Nikki, you can nod your head in agreement, but I believe staff has received loud and clear that there's an expectation that odor and setbacks will be specifically addressed when this item comes back to the Planning Commission. And Chair Tamura, I do notice that there's a couple of public comments up.
Yes.
So it might be a good time to start that part of the meeting.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the comment we just had, though. So, Greg, when this first came around, Commissioner Carr, when this first came around, I went around to all the sites in District 2, and I didn't know anything about the sort of temporal nature of these odors. I didn't smell anything when I went around, but in some cases I was pretty far away from where the actual grow was. But the key thing, we had a whole van full of people from the Bay Area Air District come up, and County Council was in that van, I was in that van, Andrew was in that van. And we went to, I don't remember how many sites, I remember at least one, but I think it was two. But the issue that came out later is that, there is a strong time dependence on when things smell more. So if you go in the middle of the day, for example, it may not smell nearly as much, right, as at dawn or at dusk. And if you go in July, it may not smell as much as in October. So, I think all those things, people need to be aware of when they're saying, well, we're going around and smelling stuff. Okay.
And thanks, Commissioner. That's the kind of information that I think is valuable to us. It may not lead to any clear cut standards or measurements, but it's what time of year is it likely? How significant does it get during that harvest time? That kind of, even if it's anecdotal, I think it can inform our ordinance. So I'm just hoping that those kind of experiences can be brought to bear.
Yeah. Okay, I think I'll open the public comment. I see the first hand up is Doug Gardner, and I am not able to do the normal administrative functions, Scott.
When you select him, there's not an allow to talk button?
No.
Right now.
Got it.
Hey, Scott, Nikki, so good to see everybody. Thank you for hosting this meeting. I really appreciate that. I've been trying to get my cannabis cultivation permit for over 2 years.
Doug, if you could start by saying your name and address, please.
My name is Andrew Douglas Gardner. I am known as Doug. I'm applying for a 1 acre cannabis cultivation at 4600 Cavedale Road in Glen Ellen. We're located at the peak of Mount Veeder in between the two valleys. Our parcel is on 50 acres. I also have a property next door of 40 acres. I have about 11 total neighbors. Not one of them has ever complained about scent. All of them have written and signed a letter supporting me getting my cannabis cultivation permit. I've been waiting for a little over 2 years now, and I have still not seen much progress on it. And now as things are changing, potentially allowing us to do 10% of the land since we're zoned RRD 40, it's becoming very, very complicated to plan and prepare for all of these things, that we don't have offices that we can go into. It's becoming very challenging as an individual to do this. I really appreciate these meetings, but I'm very curious of how we can meet up or get some of your support at our site so that we can walk through these things better understanding the rules, so that we can move forward in a positive way.
Does somebody from staff? Oh, I guess, right. We just have the public comment first. Sorry. Okay, thank you for that comment. The next speaker will be Laurel Mendelson.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Lauren Mendelson. I am a resident of Santa Rosa. I am also an attorney at the law offices of Omar Figueroa. I work with cannabis businesses throughout the state. And I'm also a member of the Sonoma County Growers Alliance Advisory Committee. So as well as a board member of the International Cannabis Bar Association as of recently. Thank you for having this meeting today, and I just wanted to voice my support for changes to the county's cannabis policy that allow operators of all sizes to get access to licensing in the marketplace, as well as sensible regulations that allow folks to actually get permits in a reasonable period of time. We just heard from someone who's been doing this several years. I'm concerned by the fact that no parcels smaller than 10 acres are being considered. In the original version of the cannabis ordinance, that was allowed. I do want to just encourage the county to at least consider allowing very small sized commercial grows on smaller parcels smaller than 10 acres. It is very difficult to get a cannabis permit, to get access to licensing here in Sonoma County. This cannabis program is not being nearly as successful. Some would call it, almost a failure. And I hate to call it that. I want to see it succeed. But the problem is that it's very difficult. There's not many places to get a permit. And we keep coming back to things like odor. And I'm thankful that Andrew Smith, the Ag Commissioner, has been here to talk about how now hemp is legal in Sonoma County, and folks are legally planting large amounts of this, of a crop that smells identical to cannabis, that we are now spending so much time talking about this odor issue. And I think it's important not to get caught up in those small details when this essential industry could be very helpful to the county, provide much needed money and jobs, and really help revitalize the economy. Folks have had to sell their houses and move away because they were unable to get a cannabis permit here in Sonoma County. The community has been, decimated in a way. And I don't want to see all the cannabis operators here fail. I think there is a lot of potential for this space. I'm glad to see things like cannabis tourism being considered. So I do think it's important that we keep all of that in context and look at what's happening elsewhere throughout the state and elsewhere in the country. And now we're looking forward. COVID's giving us a chance to have new paradigms and to think of things in a new way. And I think it's important to think about the different opportunities that this industry presents, but it needs to be possible for someone to get a permit here. It shouldn't be limited to those who have a lot of money and a lot of resources here. We want to have local mom and pops and members of our local community be able to do this if that's what they want to do for their business. So I thank you all for your time. I know this is hard work, and so I thank you for doing it. And I look forward to staying involved in these discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Jamie Balaccino.
Hello?
Hello.
Can you guys
hear you?
Hello. So you can hear me, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, great. My name is Jamie Bellacino. I own the farm Hands in the Earth on Leslie Road, right in the heart of wine country. I have been working on my permit for 3.5 years. I still have not gotten it. I have a couple things I'd like to say. First of all, Commissioner Carr, you're welcome to come to my farm anytime you like and do a smell test on the border. We could sit there and breathe it in and see how it's going. It's not bad. I promise you it's not bad. Please come on by. I've invited you before. It's 841 Leslie Road. Another thing I'd like to say is I agree with everything Commissioner Smith has ever said, I've ever heard him say, except for one thing he said today. And that was that he said that the smell of hemp and the smell of cannabis will be equal. I think the smell of hemp is going to be much greater than the smell of cannabis because of the fact there's going to be so much more. I mean, we've already doubled the size of the cannabis with hemp, right? So we got double the hemp than we have cannabis now. So right there's double the smell, right? I mean, the bigger the crop, the more odor is going to be. And the limitations are much less than cannabis, and the setbacks are much less than cannabis, and the minimum parcel sizes are very small. I don't even think there is one. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Smith. I don't think there is a minimum parcel size in the agriculture areas in the hemp ordinance, is there?
Just a note, we can't answer
comment right now.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to ask a question. All right, but anyway, that's my opinion, is that hemp is going to normalize the smell of cannabis. They smell the same, guys, and the more hemp we get, Commissioner Smith also said that, a couple of years from now, we might have 500 acres. And how many acres of cannabis are we going to have? We have 10 now, right? I mean, think about it. If we have maybe 12 acres of cannabis a couple of years from now, and we have 500 acres of hemp, and the hemp can be right next to your border of the property line, hemp has almost no setbacks in anywhere, this conversation is going to be over, and we're wasting our time with it, guys. We're just wasting our time right now. There's no significance to this conversation. It's going nowhere. I promise you, within 2 years, within 1 year, we will not be talking about this anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe Rogaway.
Yeah, hi, this is Joe Rogaway. I am an attorney here in Sonoma County. Address is 1154 4th Street in Santa Rosa. And I exclusively represent cannabis companies. I pleased with some of the things that are coming out in the ordinance. I do see some progress and some modernization. A couple of just very quick points. As it relates to hemp, and this is kind of as per the earlier comment, you can have a diverse ag 10-acre zoned parcel that is essentially 10 acres of hemp that essentially has the equivalent of 10 acres of the odor of growing marijuana cannabis. There really is no difference in terms of the odor issue, and it is not something that is currently relegated to larger parcels far away from neighbors. So as we're considering these issues as relates to cannabis, pursuant to California's state licensed regime, there are a lot of issues that frankly are just far different and have evolved since the time when the county was really first considering these issues. Another thing that I think is sort of a separate but related item that's worth discussing is the issue of setbacks. And the state of California already defines setbacks and already defines not just what a sensitive use is, which is different than how the county currently defines it, but also how far a setback is, which is under state law 600 feet. And so what that means is that the county of Sonoma already has a significantly broader setback at 1,000 feet than what state law currently mandates. And so it's something to keep in consideration as you have some comments that come in expressing concerns over odor. I think part of what the reality is that people in our community, regardless of whatever issue they come forward with, are just anti-cannabis. They just don't want it near them. They just don't support the direction that the state has gone on this issue. And that odor has been the issue that they have had the most political success with. And so when I hear a lot of these comments as it relates to odor and the concerns of different constituencies in neighborhoods, I think it's worthwhile to take that with a grain of salt and to understand that regardless of whether it's odor, regardless of whether or not the county had an ordinance that said you can only grow cannabis if you are 80 years old, dying of cancer, and you have 2 plants, there are going to be people in our community that says that that's too much. And so I think it's important that we don't keep moving the goalposts, that we don't keep going further away from not just what state law is, which is already, far different than where the county's ordinance is, but to also think about what the norms are of other communities across the state that deal with outdoor cultivation, indoor cultivation, and mixed light cultivation, and to understand that the county of Sonoma is already an outlier. The county of Sonoma is already perceived as having a fairly draconian ordinance as it relates to these issues because no one can reasonably get permitted within a reasonable amount of time. And that's why I think it's such an accolade that we are looking at these issues of ministerial permitting instead of conditional use permitting. We're looking at issues as it relates to just redefining how setbacks are drawn. We're looking at issues of expanding ownership capabilities so that we don't have this just kind of weird segmentation in the industry where you have a limit of 1 acre of cultivation that is available for anyone that owns any amount in a cannabis company because of the way that definitions are different under the county's ordinance as well. So as we're looking at some of these things, I think it's just important for all of us to understand that the state of California already sets the standard for the majority of these issues, and that the easiest thing to do for a lot of these things would be to merely align with state law. We can accomplish that. They are very easy things to fix from a drafting perspective. They are legally supportable because it's essentially a matter of state
law. Hi, Joe. We're pushing 4 minutes.
But anyway, those are my comments, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I apologize for not setting my stopwatch, Scott. So please limit your comments to 3 minutes. We've got another commenter, Joanna Cedar.
Hello, this is Joanna Cedar. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fabulous. I want to remind the commission, thank you so much for having this Zoom hearing. I wish we could all meet in person. I am a people person and I would have preferred it. I just want to remind everybody that enforcement, and whether it be for nuisance or any other reasons, and having a functional program are essentially two sides of the same coin. We cannot have one without the other. And let me also remind the Planning Commission that there were thousands of growers that operated under 215 rules prior to 2018. And the restrictiveness of our ordinance is one of the major factors that led to the economic downturn that we saw at the end of 2017 and into 2018. The ensuing analysis of that economic downturn was heavily weighted in favor of the fires, because that is a far more easy, an easier reason to about which to ask for recompense, and I think that really the cannabis community really got pushed aside in that analysis, and as a result, the legacy community in Sonoma County, which I think has a lot of value. Not only is it our history, but I also think that it is our opportunity. That legacy community has really been left by the wayside and does not have a pathway into the regulated market. And enforcement without opportunity is a failed paradigm. It has not worked in any of the other legacy producing regions of the state, but we do have opportunities here. And that opportunity is really, it's not in creating large hemp fields. And I agree with that, because the commoditization of hemp is really going to get in the way of that being a viable crop in Sonoma County. But it is the differentiated crop, the craft cannabis that is grown in rural Sonoma County, that is both should be the focus of our differentiation, and should also be recognized, because these are our equity communities. These are communities that were victims of the war on drugs. These are the communities that most need economic development. And this is an opportunity for us to do that. We cannot get this done if we're trying to consolidate cannabis cultivation indoors and and larger profiles and solely on ag lands. Okay, ultimately, we're going to have to come to terms with this. In fact, the county staff did in 2016, and I will refer you back to the original ordinance prior to it going to the to the Board of Supervisors. The Planning Commission decided that it was a good idea to permit cultivation on rural residential and ag residential parcels over a certain amount. They thought it was a good idea.
Your 3 minutes are up. I'm sorry.
Okay, and I will finish. I think that we should go back to that ordinance. The Board of Supervisors said that if that ordinance did not work well in terms of creating a functional program, then we should revisit it. Now is the time to revisit it. Thank you.
All right, so that is all the public comment hands that are up.